Welcome to another edition of Focus on Alternatives, a partnership between Real Assets Advisor Magazine and ADISA. Today we're with John Grady, partner with DLA Piper USA, and we're going to be talking about advertising rules regarding Reg D investments. So John, if you can start us off by just describing what a Reg D investment is.
So Reg D investments used to be fairly simple. They were private placements of securities, and they were done pursuant to one rule that the SEC established called Rule 506B. These days it's a little more complicated because there's a new rule, 506C, that allows for private placements, but they're private placements that can be advertised or for which general solicitation can be carried out.
John, can you go deeper in describing the characteristics of those various two offering types?
So I think the big difference between the two of them is this. The 506B offering, the traditional private offering, is intended to meet two separate tests. One, that it can't be the subject of solicitation efforts, and two, the investors have to have a substantive pre-existing relationship with the persons who are offering the placement interest themselves. What that translates into is no advertising, no billboards, no signage, no newspaper ads, and a need for people who are already clients of financial advisors to be the ones who see the private placement, and not a situation where the placement, the offering itself, is used to, shall I say, solicit for clients. Interestingly, 506C puts that whole structure on its head and says you may solicit. In other words, you may advertise. You could have billboards advertising your offering, even though it's a quote-unquote private offering, and there's no requirement that it be only to people you already know, because how can a solicitation to a wide audience be to people you already know? But the caveat is everybody who purchases in the offering has to be an accredited investor, and you have to be able to show more than just the investor's assertion. You have to be able to demonstrate that they really are accredited investors.
Gotcha. So I'm seeing a lot more of the 506B offerings these days, and you touched on that concept of a pre-existing relationship. Can you dive deeper into that, and when is it appropriate to bring up a Reg D investment, and what does a pre-existing relationship really consist of?
So the SEC has been asked this question time and again, and there's a lot of interpretation, a lot of room for people to make decisions based on precedent, based on staff comments. But what it really, I think, boils down to is this. You cannot attract someone by saying, I'd like to become your advisor, and one of the sort of the reasons to become my client is that I can give you an offering of this type. In other words, you can't use the offering to generate the relationship. The relationship has to precede the offer of the private placement. Now, does it have to precede it by some set period of time? That's been arguable. Does it have to precede it in a way that you are already providing deep advisory or brokerage services to the client before you can offer them a private placement? Again, there's some debate around that. The safest course around the 506B offering is to work with firms that are going to show the offering to people who are already their clients, and when they're using the offering with new clients, to make sure they establish the client relationship before they start talking about private placements with those clients.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for explaining that in greater detail. Continuing along this kind of technical vein, what are the filing requirements for any type of solicitation or advertising materials?
So technically, advertising materials are created by FINRA member firms, and they are subject to all the FINRA advertising rules that relate to honesty, balance, candor, and the presentation rules that go into those standards. Now, at the same time, the private placement memorandum itself, which is part of the package of what's promoted, part of what investors are shown, that actually has to be filed in the case of a private placement with FINRA under one of their rules that require either the leader of the syndicate or each member, although they can delegate it to another party, but each member of the offering group has to make that filing. The materials are not filed. The materials, however, are essentially available for review and inspection by FINRA if they are looking at the member firm's advertising practices.
Understood. So I want to continue to get down into the weeds here. So when it comes to like press interviews or press releases, you have the companies and then you have potential Reg D offerings. How do you navigate that kind of potentially gray area?
It is a gray area. I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that if if what you're doing is really a substitute or a surrogate for the offering, talking about the company and not the offering is not going to be a safe place. If, on the other hand, you're talking about a company that happens to be making a private placement, but you're focusing on the company, not on the securities it issues, there is room to talk about a company that's offering securities. You just can't have the company be the proxy for the securities offering as a way of getting around the idea that you're not supposed to be publicly disseminating the offering.
That makes sense. So let's continue down a rabbit trail. Seminars. Oftentimes there's educational seminars for investors that are out there. How do you navigate seminars with Reg D investments?
So I think the key there is who you invite, because it's not that you can't talk about the offering to people who have substantive pre-existing relationships with your offering group. It's that you can't use the offer to attract new investors, and you can't therefore invite people you have no connection with to your seminar and then say, now that you're here, we're going to show you a private offering. You have to bring people in the first instance that you have a relationship with. Once they're in the room, you can talk to them about the offering because they meet that substantive pre-existing relationship test. And the fact that you're talking to them in the room doesn't mean you're now engaged in a solicitation that's problematic, because remember, it's not that there is no solicitation, it's that it can't be a general, i.e. public or advertised solicitation if you're talking about a Reg 506B or Rule 506B offering.
Got it. So any final kind of do's and don'ts for financial advisors or issuers of Reg D investments?
So I think the rule of thumb is that the rules are still or the rules of the road are still being created when it comes to 506C offerings. Are billboards really going to be the way that people raise capital just because they can? Is that an effective way to attract investors? I don't think there's any general sense yet as to how to use those permissions that the rule gives you to solicit to actually spend your money wisely and attract people who are going to invest. But it is a freedom, and we're going to see how people utilize it, and we'll watch various things. SEC enforcement actions, statements by FINRA staff and SEC staff will tell us what they think is going on. And a lot of people are still in the wait-and-see mode when it comes to those. And that's why it's still a developing area. On the other hand, with 506B, the tried and true ways of doing things are still the tried and true ways of doing things. The reason the SEC created the second rule and didn't just amend 506B when it was directed by Congress to allow for general solicitation was they wanted to preserve the 506B means of raising capital through private offerings to substantively pre-existing client relationships through no general solicitation, and to add the idea of solicitation as a separate means. So when it comes to 506B, the old way is the good way.
John, thank you for adding some clarity around these various issues on advertising for Reg Ds. And thank you all for watching. For more information about Reg Ds or alternative investments, please visit adisa.org or realassets.advisor.com. Thank you.